That's about it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to just turn off the, I'll turn the mute button just in case. Let's see, here we are. And then we'll unmute afterwards. Okay. Okay, welcome to the urinary system lecture. Our agenda is to begin with urogenital functions in maintaining continuity. This should be chapter 16 in the text. Sorry about that. That should say chapter 16 in this edition. And page 608. All right, we begin with the case of the stone baby. And of course, this is a very touching case of a woman who was pregnant for 68 years. Now, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? Anyone who's gone through a pregnancy or seen a pregnancy, 68 years, how frightening. The issue was, of course, and I hate to give away the story too much, it's a true story back from the 1800s when there was no imaging of the body, and they didn't know what was going on. And so in the case of the stone baby, it was an ectopic pregnancy. So if you read that story, it's an ectopic pregnancy, and where the abdominal veins were feeding the fetus, and the fetus grew to about 8 months outside of the womb. An ectopic pregnancy means fertilization outside of the uterus. Uterus is where implantation of the embryo occurs, and when this doesn't happen, it's an ectopic pregnancy. So the issue, of course, was that the baby died at a certain, about 8 months into it in the story, and then ossified. Ossification, in other words, turned to bone, and hence the stone baby. So it's an interesting and engaging story, and it's supposed to get you to read the rest of the chapter. But if we go through, our agenda today is to look through excretion. The urinary and the reproductive system are in the same area, but they do very different things. One is the continuation of the species, right, obviously, and the other is to remove waste. And so today's agenda is to look at the urinary system, the removal of waste, and let's start with page 608. We go through and we look at figure 16.2. If you take a look at that figure, you see that the kidneys are not alone in their removal of waste from the body. The kidneys are the main excretory organ of the body, but they're by no means the only organ of the body that removes waste. The liver, the lungs, the sweat glands, right, in the skin, and the digestive system in figure 16.2 show how different wastes are removed from the body. We have certain wastes, all right? The main waste is our nitrogenous waste, waste that basically contain nitrogen. And nitrogen-containing wastes, when they accumulate, form an ammonification of the body. You know that ammonia is dangerous for the body, and therefore building up ammonia for an extended period is going to cause death, damage to the human body. If we take a look, water, carbon dioxide, and salts are all wastes of the body. Water, of course, we're made up of, so you don't think of it as a waste. But when you have too much, such as in congestive heart failure, too much water can congest the lungs and organs of the body, and that's dangerous. Carbon dioxide acts as an acid, and we know from respiratory that that can lead to respiratory acidosis and kill you. And your salt balance is also known as your electrolyte balance. Your electrolytes or your dissolved ions have to be in the right proportions. And so what do you do when you go in the hospital? Right away an IV, right? To make sure you have your proper electrolytes. Blood tests, IV, make sure that's working right. Small changes in your electrolytes, in your salts. Again, electrolyte means salt, sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium. Small changes in some of them can lead to big problems. Let's take, for example, potassium. You don't have the right amount of potassium salts. Well, what's a nerve impulse? Sodium, potassium flow. You will disrupt the heart's functioning. So when we talk about these things, excretion, very important that there's balance. So I really like figure 16.2. I mean, I really love it because it shows all the different organs of excretion. We often only think of the kidney. Of course, if we look at figure 16.1, it shows you the urogenital system. And moving along, let's look at the kidney, figure 16.3. Let's look at figure 16.3. That is the kidney. And you know, you should be familiar with the structure of the kidney. In lab, we talked about the structure of the kidney, where there's a cortex surrounding the whole kidney, a medulla, and medullary pyramids that kind of funnel the liquid. There's a cortex, the cortex does the filtering and the medulla does the pulling of the water out. And all of this goes into the pelvis and out the ureter. When we look at the structure of the urinary system in figure 16.4, okay, page 613, if everyone looks, you see that the kidneys will process wastes, and the waste will be removed through the ureters, which will be stored in the bladder, the urinary bladder, and out from the urinary bladder into the urethra goes the urine, right? So what are the functions of the kidney? Number one, regulation of the volume of the blood. And by that we mean the more liquid that is retained in the body from the kidneys, the greater the volume of blood. So clearly, more volume means more blood pressure. So clearly, therefore, kidneys are involved with blood pressure control, which we did talk about in another lecture. But now we're going to look at how those hormones and those mechanisms work in some detail, all right? Also, kidney functions in blood pH. Why pH? Why should you care about pH? We said if the pH of the blood varies very much out of 7.35 to 7.45, there's death. So that's very important also. pH of the blood is regulated, and we'll see how as we go through. pH of the blood, volume of the blood, regulated by the kidneys. What about N and S? Nitrogen and sulfur. Those are the main, most important things to remove, particularly the nitrogen, but too much sulfur is no good either. The nitrogen-containing products are removed. We'll go over exactly how, all right? And as the form of urea. In the last lecture, we talked about urea being processed in the liver. Here it's removed from the body. Erythropoietin, EPO, you can write next to this word, EPO. Erythropoietin is a hormone that regulates red blood cell formation. So the kidney is actually involved with the production of red blood cells. It detects the amount of red blood cells and oxygen in the blood and sends out this hormone to the bone marrow to make red blood cells. I bet you didn't realize how much the kidney does. That's why we put this at the end. Kidney is best taught at the end of A&P because it synthesizes or brings together all of the different concepts that we have talked about. Renin. Renin is a weird thing. Renin curdles milk. You don't really have to know that. You have to know that renin is made by the kidney to regulate blood pressure. Renin regulates blood pressure. We'll talk about that shortly, but it stimulates other hormones that retain fluid in the body. Last but not least, it regulates calcium absorption by activating vitamin D. So the kidney activates vitamin D, and vitamin D allows calcium absorption in your intestines. If you take a look at the figure 16.4, there's a fancy image of this where the kidneys, move our picture out, where the kidneys will deliver the liquid to be removed from the body through these ureters, stored in the bladder, and out the urethra. Kidney is bean-shaped and fist size. Right, make a fist, that fist size, bean shape, and put it at the small of your back on either side. That's where the kidneys sit. So sometimes when there's a pain in the lower back, could be a kidney infection, could be lower back trouble. You know, that's the first thing I think about. All right, so what's the microanatomy of the kidney? How does the kidney pick up urea from the liver, ions, salts, water from cells, and process it properly. How does that processing happen? Let's take a look at figure 16.5. Okay, that's a picture of what we call the nephron. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. We have 1 million nephrons per kidney. And, you know, I once asked a student, what's this a picture of? They wrote a snake. Don't write a snake. It's not a snake. This is a microscopic picture of 1 million different little tubules called nephrons in your kidney, all right? Let's take a look at it. I know it looks like the front of a snake's mouth, but it's not. And this is called Bowman's capsule. Bowman's capsule, this section, receives the liquid coming out of the blood. This is the renal artery. If you take a look at figure 16.5, it's a better picture than my drawing, but it serves the same purpose. The renal artery basically does what? Brings blood from the heart into this ball of capillaries. What's a ball of capillaries? It's like a bunch of capillaries all strewn about. When you put a bunch of capillaries all strewn about, all right, think of it as a road going into a bunch of roads all over the place. It gets crazy in there. There's a ton of pressure. We call that process filtration. Filtration occurs in the glomerulus. The glomerulus is the ball of capillaries where there's a lot of pressure and stuff gets shot out because there's a lot of pressure. And as it's shot out into Bowman's capsule, this acts as a filter. This Bowman's capsule acts as a filter so that the little stuff gets to go through into Bowman's capsule and the rest stays in the bloodstream. And of course, the renal vein returns the blood to the heart. Now, if you take a look, the renal artery, all right, and the glomerulus, and these tubes going round and round constitute the circulatory system of the kidney. The tubes we're talking about, starting with Bowman's capsule and going down, up, and around, are all part of the nephron, all right? That nephron is the tube that connects Bowman's capsule and the filtered material from the glomerulus with basically your urination and the outside world where you urinated out. So anything getting in the tube, if you remember anything from this, anything getting in the tube is going to be removed unless you reabsorb it. Anything staying in the bloodstream is going to stay in your bloodstream and stay in your body, all right? So let's go over the structure of the nephron. Again, the glomerulus is the ball of capillaries that are part of the circulatory system. The Bowman's capsule receives the filtered material from the glomerulus. Then we have something here called the PCT, or the proximal convoluted tubule. In figure 16.5, proximal means closer to Bowman's head. Convoluted, because it's a little bit convoluted. Convoluted means up, down, up, down. And it's a tubule. This tubule then becomes a big giant tubule called the loop of Henle. It makes a loop. That makes sense, right? It makes a loop. Loop of Henle. Henle discovered it, so he gets its name. And there's a thin filament on the bottom and everyone a thick filament on top from here to here. That becomes important later. Then the liquid enters what we call the distal convoluted tubule. And distal convoluted tubule means further away from the glomerulus. Again, all this is a nice picture in figure 16.5, but I like my own drawings. What can I say? All right, so make a long story short, the material goes into the collecting duct and is urinated out of the collecting duct. You know, out, as we said, into the renal pelvis, ureters, bladder, urethra, out into the body, into the toilet bowl. Anything going out here, right toilet bowl, right toilet bowl, toiletta. All right. What's the processes that happen? I kind of alluded to all of them, but let's just go 3 processes. You see 3 processes. And if you look at page 615, I have 3 processes: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. Okay, those are the 3 processes. So and I write about them, I might add, beautifully, and I think you'll enjoy it. If you look at figure 16.6, it shows you the 3 processes and where they happen. Let's go to figure 16.6 as we talk about the physiologic processes. First of all, High pressure in the glomerulus forces out smaller objects in the blood. That is known as your filtrate. That is known as your filtrate. Water, salt, glucose, urea, amino acids, all of these things are, how do I put it? Small. If you have a filter, right? If you have a filter, you saw a video of filtration. If there's a filter, little stuff gets through, big stuff does not. Should a red blood cell be in your urine? Absolutely not. Should a protein be in your urine? Absolutely not. Should white blood cells be in your urine? Absolutely not. Things that are big should not be in there. They instead indicate disease. And in your lab last week, you saw the urinalysis and you saw that certain things mean disease, right? White blood cells mean infection. Sugar means diabetes. Blood means kidney damage, in general. But anyway, filtration is the first part. You got to get the small stuff out. It's known as filtrate. It goes then into the Bowman's capsule, the proximal convoluted tubule, down the loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. That's where the filtrate goes. But all things should not go out of your body that get filtered. And some things did not get filtered that should. So secretion is getting, I put this in very simple terms in my head, getting rid of useless items from the blood. Stuff that you don't want. For example, that is defined as secretion. So for example, hydrogen is secreted out, okay, of the body into the nephron to maintain a constant pH. Things that you don't want, ammonia that did not get through, will be secreted out and removed as waste. So that is secretion. It's an active and passive transport process into the renal tubule, all right? These creatures have to be removed that are dangerous for us. Then we have reabsorption. Because filtration is unselective, in other words, it's only based on size, some things have to be returned back into the blood. That is reabsorption. Most of your water in the filtrate is reabsorbed. Right? And where does that happen? Let's talk about reabsorption for a minute. You don't want to lose too much water. It could be dangerous. So the proximal convoluted tubule reabsorbs 70% of the water that's lost and the 75% of the salt that's lost. It's an active transport process. And here's how it works. The descending limb of the loop of Henle is permeable to water, but not salt, right? So water can return back or leave through osmosis from the tubule. The thick segment of the ascending part of the loop of Henle, let me repeat that and show it to you right here. This part, let me show you. This part of the loop of Henle, the thick segment, can draw an arrow out, all right, can draw an arrow out and write active transport. That part of the loop of Henle, you go back down, transports salt out, creating a hypertonic solution outside of the loop of Henle. Therefore, in the thin segment, there's passive transport of salt out, and water follows the salt. So water is returned into the bloodstream because the thick segment actively transports out sodium. The distal convoluted tubule regulates the blood pH by reabsorbing bicarbonate ions. That's just a definition. Reabsorption in the distal convoluted tubule of HCO3 negative, right? And this is what maintains sodium and potassium homeostasis. And I kind of wanted to put all this in one term, all right? Let me put in one paragraph, I explain what I just said. This is a summary, all right? Let me read the summary and then we'll go over it. As filtrate moves along the nephron, it becomes more and more concentrated, losing water. Because the interstitial area is high in solutes, as the ascending thick loop, this should say thick loop, actively transports out NaCl. Since water follows solute out of the nephron, filtrate gets more and more concentrated. So what that paragraph is saying is that the active transport of sodium out of the thick, change this word to thick. See, I get you thinking, thick. Active transport of salt out of the thick loop of the loop of Henle pulls all the other water out of the collecting duct, out of the loop of Henle, and therefore you reabsorb the water, all right? That's my point. My point of the kidney is that you're concentrating the nitrogen waste to remove it, but you are keeping the water and salt that is needed. Okay, that's the whole point. Let's take an example, the collecting duct. That's the last part of the tube. As you can see, again, you can refer back to figure 16.5. That collecting duct is going to be permeable to water, but not salt. I repeat, the collecting duct is permeable to water and not salt. And when the collecting duct has water in it, it will return. And it will follow the solute back into the bloodstream, right? Much water is lost here due to the hypertonic environment. So this results in a very concentrated urine. So do you see what I mean? The water follows the salt back into the bloodstream because the thick filament of the loop of Henle is pumping back salt, and the water follows the salt back into the blood. That's how you concentrate your urine. So you don't just pee out water. Cats are notorious for smelly urine, right? Anyone have a cat? You know, these cat, I have a very selfish cat. Anyway, luckily he doesn't pee on a carpet. If a cat pees on a carpet, he damages your furniture. That's because they have very long loops of Henle. Their long loops of Henle concentrate the urine and pull back, I suppose we could say pull back the water in a greater amount than humans, and you're just losing a ton of nitrogen waste. That's why it smells very ammonia-y, cat urine. Our type 2. So the result, anyway, is that here's the result. You know, this is the one sentence that you should remember for the kidney. Kidney rids nitrogen waste without losing much water. That's our adaptation to living on land. That's how come we can live on land. So, you know. All right. Hormonal control. I actually reread this to get it straight, okay? And I wish a teacher would have told me this when I was going to school. There are 3 hormones that control the kidney: ADH, angiotensin II, and aldosterone. Those 3 all do the same thing: conserve water. They bring water out of the loops, out of the tubes, and back into the bloodstream. Right? Now, the details of this you have to know, but the big picture is very important for you to know too. All 3 reabsorb water. Why don't we look at how each of these does it? ADH is an abbreviation for anti-diuretic hormone. Anti-diuretic means, diuretic means you pee, anti means you stop peeing. So anti-diuretic hormone stops you from peeing, just like all the other 3. It's made by the hypothalamus, stored in what? The posterior pituitary. Glad there's no cumulative final, right? You may have forgotten that. 6 weeks ago when we started class, 5 weeks ago. Anyway, ADH is stored in the posterior pituitary, and it's released when the hypothalamus, which monitors the solute concentration. Again, the hypothalamus in your brain, right, monitors the solute concentration of the blood. That means concentration. When that solute concentration goes too high, that means you need to reabsorb more water. You're getting too dehydrated, too much salt. When it goes too high, ADH is released. And ADH acts by increasing the permeability of the collecting duct and the distal convoluted tubule that we just talked about. Increased permeability to water and allows more water reabsorption. That is how ADH holds water in the body when we have a high solute concentration. Alcohol, if you ever heard of breaking the seal, that means you go to the bathroom and then you have to keep going to the bathroom because of the alcohol. Alcohol inhibits, it's a depressant, so it slows things down. It inhibits the release of ADH, causing excess water loss, hangover, and dehydration. That is the physiology of alcohol. hangovers and problems. You're all too young for that, so you know you got to close your ears. But that's the reason. ADH, you know, you can tell your parents you drink, you're slowing your ADH, and you have to pee more because the hormone is not helping you to retain the water. All right, so an interesting point, and that goes for the rest of the hormones too. Alcohol is a depressant. Angiotensin 2 increases your blood pressure, all right, because it increases secretion of sodium out of the proximal convoluted tubule. And then water follows the salt out of the tubule back into your bloodstream and increases your blood pressure. Actually, the coronavirus attaches to, I believe, angiotensin 2 receptors. And there was some research that those high blood pressure pills cause more susceptibility to coronavirus. But the answer is, after much discussion, people who were on the angiotensin 2 inhibitors had less susceptibility and problems with the virus. So, you know, I hate to talk too much about this coronavirus because I'm recording this. By the time I record it, something's going to change. But that's the latest results, just so you know. High blood pressure pills for angiotensin, these are angiotensin blockers, tend to help people to do better with the coronavirus, perhaps because the virus can't attach to the receptor. But again, all these are hormones, and hormones attached to receptors. So again, how does this operate? Angiotensin causes PCT, secretion of sodium, and therefore water follows it. And that's how you get a lower blood pressure. That's how you get a higher blood pressure. And the blood pressure pill blocks the receptor from doing it. And so how does angiotensin 2 work? It not only causes salt to be actively transported, it also activates aldosterone, another hormone that retains water. How does it do it? In the juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is just a structure in the arterial wall near the glomerulus, all right? It's in the kidney. It detects low solute concentration and causes renin to be produced. And I told you renin is a milk curdler, but renin also acts as a hormone that stimulates angiotensin 2 to form when the solute concentration is too low. And also the endothelium of the lung has little detectors, not just the JGA, to detect the low solute concentration. And so when aldosterone is formed due to the angiotensin 2 acting on it, the adrenal glands make aldosterone, and aldosterone increases reabsorption of sodium, and water follows that sodium out back into the blood and increases blood pressure. So again, retaining water, increasing the blood pressure. These are kind of difficult to think about, but if you think about the idea that all three will raise blood pressure and retain fluid, that will help you understand the physiology. Each one works a little different, and I just want to go over this one more time. ADH works by increasing the permeability of the collecting duct to return water back into the bloodstream. Angiotensin 2 increases the sodium out of the PCT, and that's the site where water follows back into the bloodstream. Again, increasing water in the bloodstream, thus increasing blood pressure, right? And last but not least, aldosterone increases reabsorption of sodium in general in a few areas, and water follows back as well. So that's the mechanism of all three. When we think about some of these other words like the JGA and renin, you should just associate that with angiotensin 2. That's how you detect that you need angiotensin 2, and that angiotensin 2 stimulates aldosterone. That's, another mechanism there that you should be aware of. And that renin stimulates the angiotensin 2, which stimulates the aldosterone. So it gets a little crazy, but the idea is just draw a little picture of angiotensin 2, aldosterone, and ADH, all raising blood pressure. That's easy. And then you can write next to each one what you know about each one, what we just said. That, for example, ADH works on the collecting duct, but angiotensin 2 works on the PCT. So you may want to go over that. And the picture in the text that helps is figure 16.6. That gives you an idea. Okay, a couple of other items I wanted to go over is how the processing happens in the liver to remove the waste. It's very important to note that red blood cells have to be removed constantly. They constantly get worn out. Proteins also have to get removed. They constantly are broken down. We call that process deamination. And why are they broken down? In the last lecture, we talked about metabolism, right? That metabolism is the building up and breaking down of macromolecules. Angiotensin 2, amino acids, no doubt, have a part on them. If you remember ANP1, it's the NH2. Everyone see that? NH2. That nitrogen has to be removed. It cannot stay in the body or it will be ammonification and toxicity. So, why do I bring this up now? And I kind of brought it up in metabolism to emphasize that this is the reason for a kidney. You must be able to conserve water but remove this waste that is circled right there, NH2. All right, so this is an amino acid. NH2 is removed in the kidney, as you know, converted to NH3, which is toxic, and very quickly carbon dioxide is added to NH3 or ammonia and made into urea. Urea is much less toxic and is removed by excretion that we just described through our skin, but mostly through our kidneys. And kidney disease occurs when waste is built up. You do a blood test, you see NH3, ammonia, urea, creatinine starting to build up. That is kidney damage. And so kidney disease, I threw a big word at you. Glomerulonephritis is just an example of an inflammation and damage to the glomerulus, the cortex region of the kidney. Other less serious disease, the gout, uric acid precipitates out as nitrogen waste. If you take a look at figure 16.9, fish will produce ammonia as their waste. They don't need a big kidney. Why not? Because they're creatures of the sea. They're not trying to conserve water like us. Cats give out urea like us. They happen to give out very concentrated urine, but they give out urea. Birds give out uric acid. And, if you really want to go deep and think about it, why doesn't a bird give out urea? A bird grows in an egg, right? And an egg has an embryo. You ever eat an egg? Obviously. If the little embryo gave out urea, it would be killing the egg. The egg would kill itself. So the waste product of a bird or any egg-laying creature is actually uric acid. And does anyone know what uric acid is? That's the question. Uric acid, I'll never forget. I finished my, the year was 1995. I finished my core exam and my master's program in biology. And make a long story short, I was walking. We were all celebrating, me and my friends, and got an ice cream cone, very happy, SUNY Albany, finally done, 4-hour exam. And I have to say, they all started giggling. I was eating an ice cream cone, and it tasted very strange. And they laughed, and then terrible friends, they told me, basically, a bird pooped on the ice cream cone. What a ridiculous story, but it happened. Terrible friends. It does not taste like chicken, by the way. Uric acid is the byproduct. It's bird poop, basically. Gritty, not tasty, tangy. But my point is, uric acid is produced a little bit by us, definitely by birds, so it doesn't kill the embryo of the bird, so that the uric acid crystals just stay on one side of the egg and the little bird embryo can develop. So it's interesting. We are all made a certain way for certain reasons. You know, I always find that fascinating. The anatomy fits the physiology, complementarity. And the gout, I'm sure none of you have had a bout with the gout. Let me know if you do. Put it in the chat room. Because the gout, I never had the gout. They used to call it rich man's disease because if you eat food high in purines, they say that you tend to form more uric acid crystals, which, as we said, is pretty much bird poop. And it precipitates out. This word is PPTS. That means precipitates out. It forms a solid. And you get it in your big thumb or your big toe. It tends to fall out into your joints and causes pain. So that's gouty arthritis. You know, some people have it more than others. Some are more prone to it, but usually it's associated with a diet rich in like organ meat, sardines, liverwurst, things like that. But also, you know, a diet high in fat, that type of thing. But to make a long story short, it's that nitrogen that has to be removed. The uric acid eventually gets reabsorbed, and people have to change their diet or take a certain medicine or both, obviously. But this, I put this in and I spent some time on liver excretory function because this is the root cause of why we have to have kidneys to control our processing of nitrogen waste. All right. What I'm going to do now is take questions, stop the recording, and we'll move on. Thank you for your attention.